Are you looking for inspiration for the March 2023 kit from Spellbinders? Hi, I'm Jess from jess-crafts.ch.page, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have the Spellbinders March 2023 card kit. This inspiration will work well for many of these Spellbinders card kits, so if you have a different one and you just want to look for some general ideas, this should still be quite helpful. I really love this card kit. I love the color scheme of it. There's a lot of pastels in the Spellbinders card kit, but this one had a little bit brighter and more of like a jewel tone palette to me, so I was really excited to work with it. I picked 4 of my no scrap templates, and these are for 6x6 paper with A2 size cards because this card kit comes with A2 size cards and 6x6 paper. However, if you're finding this video and you love 12x12 paper or 8x8 paper or 6x8 paper, no worries, because at jess-crafts.com I have templates for those size papers, and I also have templates for slimline and 5x7 cards. So if you think of a size of card or paper, I probably have something for it, and if I don't, just ask, because I always love to get a new idea. But today I picked 4 of my 6x6 templates. And now I'm going to pick 2 papers to go with each template, and those 2 papers also need to match each other because I am going to mix the patterns. The Spellbinders paper is single-sided, and when I do pattern paper cards, I like to have more than one pattern on each card. So in this instance, like if I'm not working with double-sided paper where I get 2 patterns on one sheet, I will often just cut 2 sheets of paper with the template and make additional cards. Most of my templates make 2 cards. Sometimes they make less and sometimes more. So today, 3 of my templates will make 2 cards each, and 1 of them will make 4 cards. Once I have my pattern paper and my template picked, I will put them in these pockets. They will fit in a binder, but I never use them that way. I just like that it fits an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and all of my accessories in it. So if I pick out like die cuts or whatever to go with it, I can put them all in there. If I cut up my paper and I cut up my cardstock, it will all go in there and they hold pretty nicely. And this helps me when I'm trying to make a lot of cards with one kit. This is also great because one of the things about the Spellbinders kits is you don't really need to add much to them. In fact, I did a video last month where I tried to add as little as possible because the card kit even comes with adhesive and card bases. So, you just kind of need your paper trimmer and you can start making cards. When I look at my templates, they tell me exactly how to cut the pattern paper as well as how to cut the coordinating cardstock mats. You don't need to cut the mats. Often a sketch will look great without them, especially if you're using 2 different patterns of paper. If you're using the same pattern throughout, the mats can be really helpful for breaking things up and making your layers more distinct. But you don't have to use them, and that's totally up to you. You will find the measurements for the cardstock on the card sketches, and then next to it is how to cut the 6x6 paper. This is also an additional step, but I know that some people find it interesting to see like different parts of the behind the scenes process. And so I like to keep one set of the pattern paper and cardstock for making an Instagram reel and one for making my YouTube example, and then the rest I assemble off screen. So I just kind of sort things out, but you can do this too if you're making like card kits for someone else to use. So say you're working with like a camp group or like a Girl Scout troop or with a senior home and you need to get all the pieces together and they're just doing the assembly part, then doing a similar sort of kitting system can really help. I am starting with template number 17. There are 2 sketches to go with this template, so you can use whichever one suits you. One calls for no cardstock mats, and I'm going to use the one that does call for cardstock mats. It just kind of spreads these 3 by 3/4 inch pieces of pattern paper across the card and then just kind of stacked on top. It is super simple, but a really effective design. And for this one, I actually didn't mix the patterns. So I picked out a yellow paper, like a honeycomb paper, and a blue bee paper, and I just used all the yellows together. So if you have, again, like some of the sketches are a little bit more friendly for single-sided papers because they don't really need the mixing because the papers aren't layered on top of each other, and this is a good example of that. So this is really, really effective for single-sided paper, but it does make 4 cards, so it may take a little bit longer to use up your paper. I'm going to pair some of the die cuts. The Spellbinders kit comes with a lot of die cuts, and if you want to see a more extensive look at the collection, at the card kit, I do always share a first look video where I kind of just go through the contents a bit more so that you guys can see it. And of course, there are pictures on the Spellbinders site, which will be linked below. I don't believe I've mentioned this yet, but Spellbinders did send me this kit in exchange for design work as marked in the video description, etc. So I want to be clear on that. And sometimes I am going to pop up some of my elements. The card kit does come with some foam tape. It's a little bit on the thicker side, so if you find that you need thinner foam tape to keep things maybe a little bit easier to mail, then I recommend taking 2 scraps of cardstock or more, depending on how thin your cardstock is, and gluing them together. It's a great way of using up small scraps of cardstock, and it gives you a much lower profile sort of dimension. I also use some of the puffy stickers and chipboard stickers to embellish some of the other cards made with that sketch. If you want to see that, there is a coordinating blog post where I do post more pictures. Another thing that I like to do with scraps of cardstock is use it to prop up pieces on my card. So for instance, here on sketch number 28, I believe that it is, and I'm going to make 4 of these. I made 8 of the first one. For this one, this large square overlaps the rectangle underneath and then sits on the card base. If I were to glue it directly down, I use 110-pound cardstock from Recollections for most of my matting. I know a lot of people prefer to use thinner cardstock for matting, and go for it. There's no reason not to, except for that I don't like to have thin cardstocks for mats and thick cardstocks for die cutting. I prefer just to have one kind of cardstock. It's a little bit easier for me to manage in my smaller craft space. So with that in mind, that's why I use the thicker stuff and why it can be helpful to prop up some of those pieces. So by adding a layer of cardstock behind the square where it's touching the card base, it keeps everything nice and smooth across the board. So that was 4 from card sketch number 28. We're going to move on to number 34. This one, all these last 2, I picked a lot of simple sketches today, but this only has 3 pieces, and they're relatively quick to cut because they're all fairly large pieces. It includes 2 vertical stripes and then a horizontal stripe, which is where I usually put my sentiment or my embellished image. For this for this project, I didn't pick the same cardstock to use on all my mats, and that is something I try to do sometimes because it saves you time. If you think, okay, every single paper in this collection goes with black, I'm just going to use black mats for everything, that can save you that decision fatigue of constantly having to pick a new color of cardstock. However, I did find that this collection, because it had so many beautiful colors, it was a little bit harder to pick a cardstock that went with every single set. So like some of them look great with the black or the dark blue, but then like this one, for instance, I think the dark blue would have been fine, and I actually kind of wish I hadn't used this yellow. But there was just some of them, like, if there was just pink, I didn't want to make it as heavy with some other, like the black or the blue. Anyway, I think this yellow cardstock is a lot brighter than I initially think it is. I'm always like, oh yeah, it's not so bad. And then every time I film with it or photograph with it, it just always looks like almost neon. So this might be one of those cardstocks I'm gonna have to move on. I keep trying to use it, and every time it's just a little too bright. But this sketch calls for you, and this is sketch number 39. If you need to know which sketch it is, if you liked one of them, go to the blog post. It'll have a link directly to it so that you can download the sketch and template. And it calls for a set of squares, 2 large 3x3 squares for the focal point. We use 1 for each card. And then each card has 4 little squares that are 1.5 by 1.5. This one can be a little bit more time consuming than the previous 2 or 3 just because there's a couple of small pieces going on. These little squares, they can be pretty easy to cut because they're all the same. once you start cutting them, the cardstock, etc., you don't have to keep thinking of new measurements or going back to check the measurements. You just need to cut a whole bunch of those smaller squares. And again, here I'm just going to take a scrap of that cardstock and pop it behind the little bit. This is less important, so potentially that large square could dip in between the smaller squares, but because it's being supported on all four corners by that background, like those background elements, I don't think it's so as important to do this, but it's just something that it helps me to use up those little scraps that are just kind of sitting there anyway, and I'm not so good with using them up outside of it. Because this card kit comes with so many die cuts, I usually try to make a point to use multiple die cuts. Even in this case, I'm using a little tiny bee with this larger sentiment. It's still, using up a couple on each card makes me use the cards more, or the die cuts more in proportion to the pattern paper, which is my preference. I don't want to be stuck with a bunch of die cuts when I am finished with a kit. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.